Welcome back, everybody. This is Night Flight. I'm Judith Grover, and today I have Gary Lachman with me. His website is garylachman.co.uk. He is an author. He has written over 20 books. Among them are biographies about Carl Jung, Rudolf Steiner, and Emanuel Swedenborg. I wanted to say Kant, but that is not right.
Well, I'll get around to him at some point, I suspect.
Okay, so he also is a public speaker, and yes, he used to be in the band Blondie. So Gary, welcome that you are here and you are willing to come to my humble channel.
Oh, well, thank you for having me on, Judith.
So what sparked your interest into all things, let's say esoteric, psychology, and the occult things?
Well, it all started, I mean, you mentioned my being in Blondie a very long time ago. It all started around then because when I was growing up, I mean, I was always a reader. I always read quite a bit. But I had no interest in the occult or magic, or aside from sort of weird fiction, H.P. Lovecraft or old horror films. I mean, I was a fanatic about old horror films in the 30s and 40s and all that. But I never really thought about magic or anything like that in any serious sort of way. And then when I was pretty much first playing with Blondie in 1975, and for a few months or several months, I was sharing a loft space with Chris, the guitarist, and Debbie, the singer. And they had a kind of kitschy pop interest in these sorts of things. And, you know, they had, you know, there'd be upside down cross somewhere, or, you know, I Ching coins or something like that. But then the place we were living in, the fellow who was sort of renting out the floors, he was very interested in Aleister Crowley. And he had one of Crowley's Thoth Tarot decks, which at the time was still relatively rare, I think. And at least I had never seen one before. And he would do these impromptu tarot readings. And he did paintings based on some of the tarot trumps. And I even modeled for one for him. And it was in that milieu that I became interested in all that. And I became interested in Crowley. But what really got me going was reading a book, a book by a British writer named Colin Wilson, and it was just called The Occult. And it was published in 1971, so it was still relatively, you know, new when I came across it. And what grabbed me about it was that he was writing about all these things in a perspective of a kind of philosophy of consciousness. Not that I was going around thinking very much about philosophy of consciousness when I was 19 playing in a punk rock band, but that was sort of the background to it. And I had read Nietzsche and existentialists and all, and he talks about them in the context of this, you know, other stuff which I had no idea about. So it really grabbed me, and I became obsessed with it, you could say, at that point. And it was a good time to do that because in New York at that time, and for the next few years, there was sort of an occult boom in publishing, and there were lots of very cheap discount reprints of classic occult stuff from the 19th century, let's say, that was in public domain. And new stuff, Wilson's books, but then there was lots of other people Francis King, I mean, these are people writing about the occult a lot, Kenneth Grant. And a lot of stuff was coming over from the UK to the US. There wasn't as much happening in the US at the time. That later became kind of new agey kind of stuff later on. But that was about it. I just became really fascinated in it. And one of the products from that was this song I wrote while I was in Blondie called I'm Always Touched by Your Presence, Dear, which was about this sort of telepathic link between my girlfriend at the time and myself, and we were having shared dreams, and, you know, we knew when the other one was calling the other, and all that sort of stuff that happens usually with couples. So yeah, that was it. That's how it got going. And since then I just kept, you know, being interested in it deeper and deeper, in a kind of early, you know, late teen, as it were, enthusiasm turned into, I hope, a halfway serious sort of study of all this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Looking back, would you say that it was beneficial to your personal development having a proper knowledge of the occult?
Well, look at me now. Judge for yourself. Uh, I mean, I have no idea. I don't. There isn't another me I could do a test run with. Okay, well, here's me 45 years after I started, reading this sort of stuff, as it were, and then here's me without that. So, yeah, was it beneficial? I wound up turning something that was, very kind of, halfway naive enthusiasm, just because it's just very exciting and strange, into, I mean, I have a second career at it. So, and I mean, I wouldn't say I'm an occultist myself, although, there are, how should we say, occult ways of looking at the world that I share. But they're only occult because we have a particular way of understanding our experience in the world that has been dominant for the last few centuries that excludes these things. But if you look into history, you can see much of what we consider the occult tradition, the Hermetic tradition, it was what we would call mainstream. So, I mean, that was one of the things that fascinated me as I became more and more interested in this, to see its place in history and how, many people, Newton, all these people, Copernicus, all these people that we consider, and rightly so, to be, the architects of what we call the modern world. At the time, they were deeply steeped in all of the Hermetic philosophies and things. And a lot of that got airbrushed out of their biographies until, relatively recently.
Okay. I recently read an article of yours that is titled "As Above, So Below: Are Occult Forces Influencing what is going on here?" When you say occult forces, what do you mean exactly?
Well, occult just means hidden.
Mm-hmm.
That's all it really means. Occluded. It's a term in optics, occultation. And when the moon passes between us and the sun, it occludes the sun. And again, mentioned Newton. Gravity. At the time when he proposed it, many people considered it an occult force. It was, what the phrase is attributed to Einstein, but back then they did say it's kind of spooky action at a distance. Like how is this? How does there's no medium to transmit this force that you're talking about, and so on and so on. And so a lot of people at the time, we just take it for granted. But no one's ever seen gravity. Obviously feel its effects, but so it's an occult force in that sense. So, but in that particular article, that was about. More or less about how sort of forces or energies or influences from the stars, the cosmos, the idea that they may have an effect on, an influence on social events here. There's different, I mean, astrology is one of the main kind of bodies of that. This is an ancient idea that somehow the stars at your time of birth and all that, they kind of imprint a certain kind of, how should we say it, path. There's a certain kind of way you're going to go, and that's or you get more specific sorts of things. I mean, in my most recent book, it's called The Return of Holy Russia, I talk about, there are a group of sort of scientists, philosophers around the late 19th, early 20th century called the cosmists, and some of them had the idea that whether it's somehow solar sunspots or solar radiations or cosmic rays, which, there are things called cosmic rays. It's not just a hippie, new agey kind of phrase. There are actual scientific things called cosmic rays, and how they might impinge and influence actual, things like wars or revolutions or migrations or somehow. So, and apparently this was an idea that was very popular in Russia at that time, and it has been sort of rebooted in recent times, certainly since the collapse of the USSR. So it's this notion that, I mean, and I'm not saying it's true. It's just like, oh, here's an interesting idea, and I got commissioned to write the article about it. So, and there are different versions of it. I mean, one of the more specific ones in sort of esoteric philosophy is this idea that Gurdjieff, who is this enigmatic Greek Armenian esoteric teacher in the first half of the 20th century. But he had this idea that somehow planetary forces, and specifically the moon, has an influence on human psychology. So at times of, well, sort of social breakdown, rioting, eruption, and rioting, many of the sorts of things we've experienced, or at least different parts of the world have experienced in recent times. But here, this would be, he would say, well, somehow a kind of radiation or something given off by all that activity is actually absorbed and is a kind of, he said it was food for the moon. Now, I mean, did he mean that literally? Is it metaphoric? I mean, with Gurdjieff, you never quite know, but the other philosophers and scientists around the same time that he was, saying these sorts of things, they actually thought there was, they could, I mean, one was this fellow named Vladimir Vernadsky, who's many of his ideas were involved with Biosphere 2, that experiment to create a sort of living atmosphere. And people behind the, making of that, they took quite a few of ideas from a book about his. So it's yeah, it's something that's there. But yeah, I mean, personally, myself, I think it's kind of 50-50. I think we're influenced by these things, but we also have, kind of independent consciousness if we actually, struggle and become conscious. That's the first step.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't think anything is written in stone, but for instance, astrology, I'm not so interested in forecasting anything. I'm more interested in what can I learn about myself. And for instance, because you just talked about the moon always in your birth chart is dealing with thoughts and emotions. So if you are not, let's say, if you're a little bit unbalanced, then maybe it's a good idea to look at that, where it is, and how to counteract that. Because it is because your moon is in a specific position does not mean you cannot do anything about it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, there's a phrase: "The stars incline; they do not compel."
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, I'm not an astrologer myself, and I know quite a few people who are and are, very very much a student of it and all that. But what I understand of it, it seems to me to make sense. But it's so my relationship to astrology is like music. I love music, but I'm no musicologist, and I can't read music. So I love listening to music, but if you get a couple musicologists around or musicians and they're talking about, they're talking shop, I kind of, tune out because I can't, I tune out because I can't follow all the technical things. So likewise with astrology, when people start talking about sextiles and trines and all that, it's all math to me. But I appreciate and understand the actual ideas and the effect, and I can see in myself in certain ways how it's very appropriate.
Yeah, another thing that interests me is about the energies. I had 2 interviews towards the end of 2019. One was more from the perspective of numerology, and it had a little bit of astrology in it. And the other one with Maxine Taylor was strictly about astrology. And she said, actually both interview partners said, 2020 will be very interesting, to put it politely. And Maxine Taylor said that for the USA in May 2020, all hell will break loose. And here we are.
Well, there you go. Well, I guess, I mean, I heard similar things, it I didn't hear it as much as I heard the 2012 meme, which was prevalent some years ago, but I did hear 2020. But yeah, what can you say? We're in a time of troubles, as the historian Arnold Toynbee said of civilizations when they reach a certain crisis.
Yeah.
And if we're not in it yet, we're certainly seem on our way.
Yeah, well on our way. So yeah, with the moon, I can attest to that. As a little child, I always used to sleepwalk, but only during full moons. I was very picky about that.
Right.
I never did it on any other day. And yeah, then of course you have law enforcement saying that, yeah, during full moons in pubs and bars,
Oh yeah, yeah.
people have a tendency to go a little bit more crazy. So something is definitely going on there.
I mean,
But
I was going to say, I think there's sufficient sort of research done to it that, you know, maybe we don't know exactly why it happens, but it does seem to happen, as you say, around the full moon. There's, you know, incidences in mental homes and in prisons and, you know, and so on and so on. And we have all the folk tales about it. So it's
yeah.
exactly why, I don't know at least, but it does seem to happen.
So as above, so below, that also means as within, so without. And
You
what?
could say that.
What?
I said you could say that, yes.
Yeah. And when I look at our current situation, I sometimes ask myself, oh my goodness, how did we manifest that? That is, what's going on here?
Oh, I mean, I have no idea. I mean, there's many things happening at the same time. I think, you know, we're at a place historically where, I mean, several things that were far away from each other, all sort of following their own kind of logic, have become closer and closer, and now they're all impinging on us. And that's usually what a time of trouble is, at least in the way that Toynbee looked at it. And he got that phrase himself from Russian history, because this was a period after Ivan the Terrible. He died, and then you had a brief reign of, but Boris Godunov was trying to hold things together, and then it all kind of collapsed into a lot of infighting, which is always part of Russian history anyway, and coups, and, you know, people seizing power and all this, and then that was the time of trouble, where everything kind of disintegrated and fell apart. So, I mean, one of the things that I've said in an earlier book, Dark Star Rising, Magic and Power in the Age of Trump, which is about this sort of occult politics that seems to have come up around Trump's election, and also in Russia, and that's sort of how I wound up writing about Russia anyway. But this idea that we're in going through a period of the war of all against all, which is a phrase Hobbes, Leviathan, but Rudolf Steiner also talks about it in some of his lectures about this coming, you know, age of, well, he calls it, he talks about Ahriman, which is this sort of spirit of materialism and kind of heaviness, and I guess in terms of, you know, society and governments, it's, you know, very materialist, or even moving towards authoritarian. But not to be too specific, but he talks about before that happens, there's something that he uses this phrase, the war of all against all, where different groups and even individuals are all kind of, if not actually battling with each other, they're competing. And I would say in one sense, we do have this war of all against all, because we have many fragments, different groups who are all out for their own kind of benefit, you know, their own little niche. They're protecting and want to expand who they are, whether it's, you know, gender or sex or racial or economic, or a variety of different kind of, you know, it's sort of the salve of, you know, not the coagula, part of the alchemical sort of process. And then individually, through the miracle of social media, we're all competing for attention and likes. We're all posting things and hoping people pay attention to it, and wanting to get more and more likes. And it's a kind of, you know, a competition there in this other realm. So in that way, it's a war of all against all, because everybody's thrown into this social media kind of arena, and saying, you know, pay attention to me. I mean, I do it myself. You do it. You put stuff out. You want people to pay attention to it. I put stuff out. I want people to pay attention to it. So
yeah,
I'm just
but
pointing it out. It seems to be the case, you know.
Yeah, but that is the only one. YouTube. I have abandoned all other things. I've never been on Facebook. I never wanted to be, and yeah. Mm-mm.
Well, I mean, I'm mostly for professional, you know, things.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, we all sort of say, oh well, social media, I only use it for this and that. I mean, you know, I use it, like, it's the same way as the telephone. You know, when the telephone first came in ages ago, and I don't mean mobile phones. I mean, you know, the telephone. it was, somebody in the building had it, if you were lucky. Then it turned out to be everybody had to have it because the world started working around it. So it's unavoidable, though. It's obviously there's a lot of noise to signal. The ratio between noise and signal is rather great. But but this whole idea of this kind of competition in the social media actually, to me, suggests a possible good side of it, or an optimistic side of it. And I come to this by way of the ideas of Abraham Maslow, the American psychologist. He's back, in the figure from the 60s, but he was sort of the father of humanist psychology. And he had this notion of the hierarchy of needs. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but in human psychology, we sort of have, there's a kind of ladder of needs, and the first few rungs are what he called deficiency needs. So obviously we need food and drink, then you need shelter, and then you need some kind of emotional relationship, or some kind of, even if it's just a pet, but something, usually it's a partner, and then you have a family. And then what he calls the self-esteem. You want the good opinion of your fellows, your approval of your peers. And I would say we're en masse in the social media, we're at that level. The people that have access to it and the people who are out there are at the self-esteem level. Not all, not everyone, but many. Let's put it that's kind of the general kind of level. And Maslow also believed that there was a further level that he called self-actualization, a further need, but it wasn't a deficiency need. It wasn't a need of something we lacked. It was a need to express and use the creative powers you have. You have to sing, I have to dance, you have to do something creative. And he was troubled in the last years of his life because he believed this was a natural kind of growth and development in human beings. But what troubled him was that it seemed many people get stuck at the self-esteem level. They don't naturally go up into the next one, but some do. And my feeling is that there's a creative minority out there, silent. I don't know them. They don't know me. They might know a little bit, or I might know, through social media or something like that. Again, but we're not all banding together to go do something. We're not occupying Wall Street, or we're not protesting. Each in our own way, or doing what we can to self-actualize, and borrowing from quantum physics this notion of non-locality. And also in how the brain works. You have elementary particles and neurons that aren't together, but they know what the other one's doing. They're somehow in contact. Spooky action at a distance. There's no connecting medium, but they know what each one is doing. So socially, I would think, let's hope that might be the case. So out in the wider world, there are lots of people out there, but they're too busy actualizing themselves that they're not clamoring on social media for attention, so we don't necessarily know about them. But the cumulative effect of their actions and others, with any luck, no way of knowing, no guarantee, may have a larger overall effect in some way, a beneficial effect, I hope.
Some people say that we are already in World War III. It's just that it's not country against country. It's the governments against the people worldwide.
Could be, but I mean, who are the people? I know who the government is. At least they have certain offices and they have certain names and the positions. But when you say the people, it's like, well, I mean, that's just rather, I'm not saying who are, but I don't know if it's like that. I mean, I'm not particularly interested in that kind of sort of scenario. And I know there's a lot, and everyone's, the government's trying to do this, and the corona virus is just a ploy for the government to affect changes to the laws in order to be able to control us. And I mean, if it is the case, I don't know what we can do about it, because I think if they want to do that, they're going to do it anyway. Toynbee, he talks about civilizations reaching these crisis points and all that. And I borrowed this term, the creative minority, from him because he uses it. And I think he got it from the philosopher Henri Bergson too. And I think the best way, if that is the case, the best way that I could in any way resist that would be to continue doing the kind of work I'm doing.
Mm.
That's why I'm not interested in conspiracy theories, because I think they're just a series of trapdoors. And you open one, and you'll fall through another one, and you'll fall through another one, and you never. It's what they call in English-speaking places the shaggy dog story, which never gets to an end. You keep getting to another kind of thing. And even if there was some kind of group who are really in power, and you finally found them, what are you going to do? How you're going to go out into the world and tell everyone that? Well, there's hundreds of people saying the same thing out there, and they write conspiracy theory books, and they go on shows like this, and they talk about it, and who believes them? And one of them could be true. So I somehow think it's best if I could pursue the sort of ideas that I've been obsessed with most of my life. So that's what I'll stick to doing, and hope for the best.
Mm. Did you ever have a personal experience that you would call paranormal?
Oh, I just finished doing a book about something along those lines. A book about precognitive dreams,
Mm-hmm.
which I've been recording my own for the last 40 years, so off and on, not continuously, but in long stretches of time. But I mean, yeah, that, and I would say synchronicities. I don't know if synchronicities count as a paranormal. I mean, they're kind of in that world, but I guess you would call it a paranormal event, some sort of strange, meaningful coincidence like that. And a few kind of patches of telepathy with, well, as I said, ages ago, I wrote a song about it. My girlfriend at the time, and with different partners that's happened, and with my sons when they were very young. I used to. It seemed to me that I knew what one of them was going to say, just before he said it, and it would just kind of pop into my head, and I would look at him, and then he would say exactly what just came into my head in some way. So one of the things I point out in the book, and this, and I'm not the first one to say this, is that even though it's very good that there has been and continues to be some hard scientific, statistical work on paranormal, ESP, and stuff like that, it's not the best environment for these things to happen, because they have much more to do with sort of feelings and relationships and a kind of bond between people. Not all of them, but that at least in my experience, that sort of thing. But the other thing with the precognitive dreams, I read a book many years ago called An Experiment with Time by a fellow named J.W. Dunn. And it was written in the 1920s. And I read it around the time when I was still playing music. So this is back about 1980, and I was living in New York still. And he wrote about how he discovered that bits and pieces of the future were turning up in his dreams. So I mean, he gives quite a few examples, and I won't go into those. But he just said, if you want to see if this happens, just write your dreams down and pay attention to what happens, during the day, or the next day and all that. And so I just started doing that, and lo and behold, it was true. It happened. And I wrote an article about it many years ago, and I've mentioned them here and there. And in my book about Jung, I think I mentioned, or some synchronicities or something along those lines. But in any case, from that time on, I just started recording all these things, the dreams and odd coincidences and synchronicities. And last year, I gave a talk here in London at Brompton Cemetery, which is a famous, very beautiful old cemetery. And they have something called the London Month of the Dead, which is a series of talks. So I gave a talk about hypnagogia, which is related. Hypnagogia is that in-between state between sleeping and waking that we pass through twice a day. I gave a talk about that, and I tagged on precognitive dreams at the end of it. And someone at the talk the next day sent me a message or tweeted, back to social media, tweeted that she'd been at the talk and she took my advice and she wrote down her dreams, and my God, OMG, it's true. And she wrote that she had dreamt that she was outside and she picked up a hedgehog, which is, I don't know if you have them, in your part of the world, but it's a very, familiar English animal. And she picked up a hedgehog and picked it up out of the road and put it on the pavement so that it wouldn't get hurt, wouldn't get run over by a car. And she said the first thing, when she went onto Twitter, the first thing she saw in her Twitter feed was a post about how to save the hedgehogs, how to protect hedgehogs. So I wrote back to her, I said, well, that's how it is. It's not always exactly, what it is often exactly the same thing, but often it's subject to what's called symbolic distortion. So because dreams work in symbols and metaphors and images and all that, and it's, things get mixed up. But when I got that tweet, I thought, yeah, I should do a book about this finally. And so I actually just sent it off to my editor. And it's more personal because it's about my own experiences. So it's a lot about my own precognitive dreams and synchronicities. And I bring in other people's work on it, Jung and several other people. But yeah, so in that sense, yes, but not psychokinesis, or I haven't had out-of-body experiences, although I've had lucid dreams and things of that sort. So that's the area where I've had it.
Yeah. And there is an idea out there that, because we have been talking about the moon, that the moon is artificial, that it was brought here, and that there was a time before the moon. Did you ever think about that?
Well, I mean, there's an old theory. There's a guy named Herbinger in the early 20th century of actually Adolf Hitler was a fan of his, and he had this idea that the Earth has had different moons at different times, and the moon is captured. It's like it's somehow captured by the Earth's gravity. I mean, I don't know. I remember when I was a kid growing up, the idea was that somehow the moon was, when the Earth was spinning around, initially a big glob of stuff went out of it, and that became the moon. And it's supposed to fit into the Pacific Ocean. But I don't think that's the idea that's, standard or popular these days. I think it is that it was somehow captured, or it may have been stuff left over from another planet. But yeah, I haven't heard about artificial moon, but I don't know. I mean, how could you know? But this interesting idea that at different times, I mean, the Earth captures the moon, and that it starts to decay, and it comes closer and closer and closer to the Earth, and then it explodes. And it's supposed to be remnants of that, or somehow evidence of that in the geological record and all that. But well, I don't know if, as I said, we just talked about Gurdjieff saying food for the moon. There's a wonderful science fiction novel by this British writer Colin Wilson called The Mind Parasites. And it's about these kind of psychic vampires. They just exist mentally. They're not physical. It's not Dracula, but it's a kind of vampire of the mind and they've been somehow sucking the life energy out of humans for centuries and centuries and centuries. And the hero of the novel and his colleagues discovered that their base somehow is on the moon. And so to free mankind from this, they actually moved the moon. And this is because the people who have freed themselves from being under the spell of the mind parasites are able to develop their consciousness. And so they have these, talk about paranormal powers. My God, they have incredible paranormal powers, and their psychokinetic powers combined are enough to be able to force the moon out of the orbit. So yeah, there's, I think there's kind of 50-50. There's a lot of legend and folklore about the baleful, malign influence of the moon, but then there's also, this notion of the moon is the source of intuition and dreams, and this other kind of consciousness, not the solar, logical, masculine consciousness, but this feminine, more intuitive, more magical kind of consciousness. So, I mean, that's what happens with a lot of symbols. They can condense, and they can even, combine opposites in them.
The other day, I watched a video from one of your fellow Englishman.
Well, I'm an American. I'm an American.
Sorry,
But I live here. That's okay. No, I'm just saying.
I was confused because you
I
live
wish I
there
was
now.
an Englishman, but no, I'm not. I'm a Yank. I'm a Yank expat. Right.
Yeah, I was confused. Sorry about that. Well, anyway, he was a little bit ranting. He was a little bit frustrated. And the title of his video was, "Where Are the Men?"
I can't help you there. I've been socially distancing, so I have no idea where they are. Does he mean like what? Man?
Yeah.
Masculine man? Kind of Jordan Peterson kind of man? Or
No, he was frustrated because, and I mean, it's true, what's going on in the schools and the children, that they cannot play together. And
right.
on this, let's say little Peter, he's falling and he hurt his knee. Nobody is allowed to go there and help him. And yeah, that's...
Do you mean specifically now because of the crisis, or?
Yeah, exactly. And
because there was also, whole issues of health and safety and all this kind of thing, and especially around children. I mean, I don't know anything personally about it, but just in terms of child abuse. So they ring fence, potentially vulnerable people, so they will be protected. But it also creates a kind of world in which you don't know what your natural gesture to help could be interpreted as something else, and so you don't want to do that. But I mean, I think this is one of the consequences of see, the problem we have today is not there's a good and an evil, is that there's lots of different goods. They started out over there. They didn't interfere with each other, but over time they're banging up against each other. So the good of protecting children or the vulnerable from some kind of abuse, or making them somehow open to it, that's a good. But your natural instinct to go and take help, when that happens, that's a good too. But in this instance, those two goods clash, and that creates the kind of situation we live in today, where I think we kind of jolt back and forth, from one thing to the other, these opposites and these extremes, because we have these things that are kind of they're not opposites, but they have different aims. The aims themselves may be fine, but they interfere with each other. You can't have like individual liberty and social responsibility. That's the classic one, right? We all want to be individuals and free and choose what we want to do, but we also recognize that we have a responsibility to society we live in. I didn't put up the traffic lights. I didn't pave the streets. Somebody else did that, and I'm here, and I'm very grateful they did. So I recognize, as an adult, I try to be, that I have a social responsibility. At the same time, I don't want to lose my individuality, or insofar as I have it, and I don't want to abrogate my responsibility to someone else. I also don't want to be only seen as a member of a group, of a particular group, which is something that happens these days. I mean, I think the individual that's one of the problems happening now. The individual is getting wiped out. And I don't mean individualistic. I don't mean every man for himself, but I mean the idea that you can be a responsible individual, you can reach a certain level of maturity and psychic integrity that you can be responsible for your actions. It's like, no, you're a member of a group, and this is how your group acts, and this is the statistics around your group, and I'm an endangered species. I'm a white male of a certain age. I'm also one of the most I should feel massive amounts of guilt for all the horrors in the world, because that's apparently we're the agents of this agents of everything that's horrible in the world. But I could say, well, not me, I didn't do it. But no, you're part of that group. So this is, to me, is another part of the fragmenting and the fracturing and the notion of the war of all against all, because groups are fighting power battles between different groups, and if you don't want to, you're not participating in that. It's unless you have independently wealthy and you can withdraw from that, and or now in a way self-isolating, you can stay apart from it, just stay at home. But still, it's just this this is one of the things I think is, you know, increasingly going to be a kind of problem, this kind of loss of the real individual, and sort of sinking into, you know, just being seen as a representative of, you know, some, you know, political, social, economic, gender kind of group.
I think what he was mostly frustrated about was that men seem to have abandoned their protective side, and that are no longer aligned with their inner warrior. And as he said, your children are getting abused at school, and you are only interested in the football.
Well, I mean, I see. I don't know what to say, because I'm not interested in football. My sons, I have two, you know, grown, well, chronologically grown sons. You know, they're very interested in it, but you know, I have no interest in it. And I don't know. You know, I think it's different. I can't speak for other men. And again,
Yeah.
I don't want to be a representative of some group. I mean, there's my own. I have my own life with my own sons and all that, and you know, I took care of them and all that kind of thing. So. Yeah, I mean, I have no idea what to say about something like that.
Well, what I would love to see is that parents, and it doesn't matter, male, female, that they just flood the school and put an end to that nonsense.
Well, I have no idea. I mean, you know, we'll see what happens. I'm just sorry. I just don't really have anything intelligent to say about that. Yeah, it's a shame that many children have lost, you know, months of the schooling, and also months of the socializing with their friends and all that. And I'm sure it's been a burden on people that live in one room, or you know, people who can't, who have to work at home or something like that. I'm sure it's been a terrific kind of burden. We can only hope that there's some kind of help for them at some point. You know, the government has announced some recent cash injection into, you know, different you know, job you know, areas that are suffering from all this. So you can only hope. I mean, I'm in that regard, I'm just I'm just a punter on the street with everybody else. I have no insight into this. It's not my department. It's the old song went.
Yeah, it's not really my department, but of course you know, I live here, I observe it,
Yeah.
and I have question marks over my head as well. So, but another thing, what I guess why it's so easy to manipulate people is we do not learn a lot, especially in school, about ourselves, about and there's nothing wrong with learning mathematics and other languages and so on and so forth, but there is no push for, let's say, developing emotional intelligence. You know what I mean?
No, of course. Well, that's not, you know, that's not. Well, I guess initially back in the day when mass education first started, there would be something like that, because you would read the great, you know, works, great poetry. This would be introduced. I'm saying this is back, you know, the 19th century, and with Matthew Arnold here, he was sort of the person pushing that. With the increasing loss of influence of the church, culture, literature, the humanities, these were supposed to pick up the slack and be able to offer, you know, that they're able to offer that side of human experience that the church was no longer able to really carry in the face of the increasing scientific materialism. But how much that worked out, you know. But no, I mean, I guess that's the attraction of alternative education things like the Waldorf schools, you know, the Steiner schools, because they do talk about at least developing the imagination, or not inhibiting it early on as the state school, or at least as they say that state school does, or mainstream education does. But I mean, I don't know. I mean, all I can say is I went to school in America ages ago. I'm a product of it. So yeah, I mean, but I think if you really, really desire some awareness of that world, it's not going to come into your head as saying, oh yes, I want to develop my emotional side. No, you'll have urges and needs and hungers, and you'll go and feed them in some way. And I don't know how it is these days, but that's why I became a reader when I was adolescent and earlier than that, and because I had hunger for something in life that wasn't available in the everyday world, and the kinds of things that everyone thought was very important. I guess I recognized their necessity, but I didn't see they were as important as some of these other things. I mean, one of the things I think that is sad about how we understand ourselves, just fundamentally, is that we don't really talk about, how should I say, all of our values are utilitarian values. They're practical values. They're values about how we can achieve things, get things done, make things better, things of that sort. And all that's useful. Like you said, it's good that we study mathematics. Yeah, I mean, I wish I had learned it more than I did. I'm horrible at it, but I recognize it's important and all that. But the whole, what makes life worth living, even though all these practical aims and necessities is the things that are not necessary. Man does not live by bread alone. And it doesn't have to be a specific religion, but there's other things. There are things that are goods in themselves. You mentioned Immanuel Kant at the beginning of our chat. And yeah, he talked about things that had value in themselves, and human beings are one of those things. So human beings are ends in themselves, they're not means to an end. And he tried to base a whole moral and ethical philosophy on the recognition that we have to treat well, this is the categorical imperative, which is boiled down to the maxim, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Basically, you recognize yourself as an end in yourself. You're not only a means to an end. We all feel horrible if someone uses us as a means of achieving something else. They don't recognize ourselves as goods, and you want to recognize yourself as that, and so you have to recognize others as that, and that's across the board. Race, gender, sex, economic status, and all that. And we like to think that but all the science, all the stuff that we think is really, really true and gives us the most accurate factual picture of the world, it says, well, that's a nice thing to think, but it's not really like that. It's really is just, everything is really just physical and material and all that, and those things exist. Yeah, they're social, the ways we need to live socially, so we're not just at each other's throats, but I mean, I think there's a great dichotomy between what we're told is the reality, the truth about the world, the truth about reality. It's meaningless. The universe is meaningless. The Big Bang happened for no reason whatsoever. Nothing was planned. Everything just turned out. 15 billion years ago, less than nothing exploded for no reason, and that's why we're having this conversation. That's basically the truth. And because we're human, we need to have all these other ideas about things, but they're fundamentally kind of illusions, or they're evolutionarily adaptive behaviors that enable us to live better and all that. But what's really real is the hard, physical kinds of stuff that are driven by cause and effect and all of that. And we're somehow able to compartmentalize those things. But if you're actually sensitive to reality, and if you're sensitive to contradictions, you say, whoa, hold on here. There's two contradictory things here. Either morality is really true and it's not based on some just social need and practical aims, but it's based on the notion that some things are good in themselves. Going back to classical philosophy, the good, the true, and the beautiful. It's not the practical, the conceivable, and the decorative. It's the good, the true, and the beautiful. They're the goods in themselves. They exist in reality, in the same way that the sensory world exists in reality. We don't perceive them with our senses. We perceive them with our soul or our mind or something along those lines. But all that's just like jettisoned a long time ago. And I think in many ways, we're experiencing the result of a very long time where we've pushed all that stuff to the side, and it's all been kept under wraps for a long time, and it's all kind of erupting now.
So we are seeing the results of complex PTSD.
I guess you could say that, but I mean, one of the philosophers I write about is a fellow named Jean Gebser. Who's German, but he lived in Switzerland for a long time, and he has this fantastic, enormous book called The Ever-Present Origin. And the fundamental idea is that humankind has mutated over time, over millennia, through different what he calls structures of consciousness, and going back to like the earliest kind of tribal group soul kind of thing before there was individuals, and then gradually the notion of the individual develops, and so on and so on. But he said, he died in the 70s, early 70s, but what he said was that now, he was writing this book in the 40s, so that's almost 100 years ago now. He was saying that we were experiencing the breakdown of the mental rational structure of consciousness. And that means all of the kind of edifice and scaffolding of modernity that we built up over the last few centuries and came to a head, say, in the 20th century. Everything fit into this kind of system, rational system. That's all starting to crumble, or has been crumbling. And intellectually, it's been crumbling for some time. The breakdown of classical physics and in humanities with deconstructionism and postmodernism and all that. But now it's hit the everyday kind of social level, where the social structures are breaking down, and it's a free fall. The whole idea that reality, you can create your own reality. Reality is up for grabs. In one sense, that's liberating, but then not everybody has the same ideas about what to do in that situation. That's what the book Dark Star Rising was about, how this notion that we create our own reality has infected contemporary politics and many things like that. And, the whole alternative fact in the post-truth world that we live in, that's an effect of what I call trickle-down metaphysics, where this whole notion of the breakdown of this consciousness structure, going back to the advent of nihilism in the late 19th century with Nietzsche, warning was on its way. Nobody paid attention to him. And then in the 20s, 30s, Heidegger and the existentialists kind of picked this up. And then by the 60s, it's being taught in the universities, Derrida and Foucault and the postmodernists. And then you have, it's mother's milk to all the universities now. I mean, the whole idea that all of Western civilization and culture is just this whole system of oppression, and every little bit of it needs to be taken apart and broken up and all that. And so, I mean, we're experiencing it on an everyday level now. We're experiencing something that, philosophers were afraid of 150 years ago. We're experiencing it now on an everyday kind of level.
Western esoteric traditions have been influenced by Eastern traditions quite a bit. Would you say there's also the other way around, that Western traditions influenced Eastern?
I can't say. I mean, I'm not an expert on the East, but I know in the context of at least one, I know D.T. Suzuki, who's a fellow who introduced Zen to the West, that he wrote a lot about Swedenborg. He called Swedenborg the Buddha of the North. And so, I mean, there's and he wrote about him in the context of at least Zen, Buddhism, and parallels or similarities that he found in that. I mean, I guess the typical idea is that, the West has picked up the Eastern mysticism, and the East has picked up Western science and rationalism. And so as the East becomes more Western with the rise of technology there and all of that, the West has absorbed this kind of spiritual side of it. And I mean, this recent book, Return to Holy Russia. I mean, one of the ideas that many people had at the early 20th century, before Bolshevik Revolution, was that Russia was somehow going to bring these opposites together. It was going to bring this Eastern kind of mystical, intuitive kind of sense, the soul, with the Western ego and the rational and pragmatic and technological, and it would create some kind of union of these two that would rise above both of them and bring on this new cultural epoch. Steiner gave lectures about that, and other people, Oswald Spengler and Hermann Hesse and others will talking about this kind of thing. And then the Bolsheviks happened, and all that was put aside. But one of the reasons I wrote the book is that in recent years, Putin has been referring to these philosophers from this period called the Silver Age. That was this time that was brewing, and there's a lot of stuff that we're still interested in now is happening there: occultism, mysticism, Eastern philosophies, variety of different kinds of things. And he's referring to that now because he's looking for different ways to give Russia a new sense of identity. It's been kind of going through an identity crisis for some time now. But whatever his reasons for doing that, I don't care about them. I'm not particularly interested in what Putin does or what he doesn't do. What's interesting to me is that these philosophers are worth reading, because what they had to offer to the West 100 years ago, before the Bolsheviks came and stopped them, they still have to offer now. And it is about something. It's some kind of combination of these two things, and not in a very literal kind of sense, where you have the yogi who using a computer or whatever. It's some what Jung would call the transcendent function. These two opposites, when they come together, they produce something greater than both of them. They create something a third. And I'm not saying that Russia itself is going to produce this, but the ideas that these philosophers had 100 years ago can still help us in the West today. There's still something that we should pay attention to. And unfortunately, because Putin is the one who's sort of reawakened interest in them, or at least pointed to a reawakened interest in them, the Western critics, oh no, you can't pay attention to this stuff. They're just these Russian exceptionalist kind of philosophers and things of that sort. But I think that's fundamentally it. We're all burdened with this tension of having these opposites within ourselves. We have an intuitive side, we have a logical side. We have a daylight consciousness, we have a dream consciousness, we have a lunar part, we have a solar part. However you want to, look at it. We have a left brain and a right brain. And usually they're at odds, or there's one that's dominant and the other one's pushed down. Occasionally they work together, and when they do, that's when the real thing happens. But sadly, it doesn't happen that often. It's what I call the Goldilocks Effect. The porridge is too hot and it's too cold. Oh, this one's just right. So when you get the two sides, the two yin yang, the two polar opposites, when you get them in this creative tension, then bang, something new happens that's unexpected. And that's, again, my hope is something like that happens now, but it's continuous. I mean, we're going through a particularly acute and distressful time now. But I mean, all of history is like that. There's no such thing as a golden age. All of history is like this. If there's a golden age, it's somewhere ahead of us. But history takes no holidays.
History takes no holidays.
There you go. You can quote me.
When you said the title of your book, The Holy Russia,
Return of Holy
Return, Russia. Yeah, exactly. Explain a little bit, why did you pick the word Holy Russia?
Well, because this was something Russia was called in the 19th century.
Mm-hmm.
It was called Holy Russia. Mm-hmm. And this is because, well, I mean, there's this in Russian sort of history, there's what they call the third Rome idea, and you had the first Rome, and this is after Christianity had taken over. So you have the first Rome, and that fell, and then Constantinople was the second Rome, and then that fell in 1453 to the Turks, and at that point Moscow was seen as the third Rome. This is when Russia was just sort of throwing off the Mongol yoke. But the reason it is back, back in the 10th century, Vladimir the First of Kiev, he converted to Greek Orthodox Christianity. Oh, he had the pagan before then. And this is when and then that became sort of the national religion of Russia. And you can't pry apart Russia and, Russian Orthodox Church. They're like that. The Bolsheviks wanted to do that. And it had this whole destiny, this whole notion of this kind of apocalyptic destiny, this messianic destiny of history. History was heading somewhere. History was heading towards some climax. And the Russian people were the ones who were the sort of safeguarding that tradition. It was given to them to protect and maintain. And in the 19th century, after Russia basically defeated Napoleon, just like in the next century, Russia in the end was the ones who went into Berlin and defeated Hitler. Russia had saved Europe from the little corporal. It saved Europe from this madman, and in their eyes, and it saved the monarchies and all of that, and all kind of. There was a sort of turn towards progressive ideas, but that's kind of that got jettisoned, and it went back to this kind of notion of conservatism and the whole idea of maintaining the status quo. That was part of the church and all that. So, and Russia was at the head of the Holy Alliance, and too. So it was this whole notion of Russia had this particular kind of destiny as the true Christian nation. It was going to maintain, that tradition, and that's again something that's been, brought back today, where the Cold War, insofar as there is one, isn't about the struggle between capitalism and communism. It's between the hyper-liberal, anything goes West, and Russia that maintains traditional values, traditional gender roles, traditional family roles, traditional, social, hierarchies and things of that sort. But again, I'm not affirming it. I'm not saying go Russia. What's interesting to me is like people in the West, especially in America, we don't know any. I'm here in London. We don't know anything about Russia. And tell you the truth, all the interviews I've been doing about the book, many of them I have to keep saying to the people, yeah, the Soviet Union was not Russia. It was 70 years in Russia. We've all grown up with it being Russia, but it had a long history before then, and it's trying to have a new kind of world now, and it has all of this fantastic culture. And I mean, the thing that happened in the 19th century was the Russian soul erupted, and it overwhelmed Europe. You had Tolstoy and Dostoevsky are the main kind of agents of that. But their writing was just so powerful and just so, it was full of, we would call it spiritual, although spiritual today just seems so weak and tepid to talk about someone like Dostoevsky or Tolstoy. I mean, they were like forces of nature. They were incredibly powerful individuals who were obsessed with ideas about the meaning of life and, freedom. And how are we supposed to live? And is it true that anything goes? Nothing is true and everything is permitted. And no, it's not. And why isn't? All those kinds of things that the West had kind of just lost touch with, and the church had lost touch with. And so it erupted. It was this volcano of kind of deep spirituality and powerful, creativity. And then that got, clamped down at the beginning of the 20th century. And the West needed that then, and it needs it again now. It doesn't necessarily have to come from Russia, but the idea that the philosophers from this time, the Silver Age, their ideas were specifically about compensating for the Western notion, which had become what was called positivism at the time. It's scientism now. The notion that all matters, everything in reality can be explained in terms of scientific terms, or we haven't got to it yet, but we will eventually get to it, and there's nothing that will fall outside of that. And this was a complete imbalance. This, we talked about two sides. This is that one side got completely dominant and imbalanced, and it needed then, and it needs now, to integrate this other side. I mean, we haven't integrated this what do we want to call it? Intuitive, magical, non-rational side, and hence it's coming out in the cracks and fissures of our society today. You know, we haven't integrated in a positive way, and it's not going to go away. So it's coming out in all different ways out in society now.
Yeah, I totally agree. Although we have all these things: radio, television, internet, blah blah blah. We do not know a lot about each other. As you said, hardly anybody knows anything about Russia and Russian people. And I had a similar experiences, not that drastic, but that was in the 90s. And I was traveling in the United States, and it happened to me a couple of times that people asked me if I'm from West or from East Germany. And I thought, and every time I had to say, guys, that's over. It's right. Done. There is no such thing anymore as East Germany. So yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't want to speak disparagingly about Americans, but
no. That was just an experience that popped.
Oh yeah, no, I'm just saying that they're not the most historically minded individuals, but that, you know, that's true of so many of us. But.
Yeah, and with particularly with Russia, I mean that's always the boogeyman in the media. So
yeah, well, I mean, it's what I've said in interviews is say, well, it's almost sort of like, oh, you think of Germans and it has to be the Nazis, which is, you know. But I guess the thing is, the Germans we've done lots of good things since then. So we've, you know, we're not the black sheep anymore. But oh, those Russians, they're, you know, you can't trust them and all of that kind of thing. But I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, and I think that if a certain group of people is constantly portrayed to you as the enemy, then I guess on a subconscious level, people think that it's not worth to learn anything about them because they are the enemy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess they're in the news again. You know, there's some, I forget exactly what it was, but it was in the news again about something, Trump's relationships with Putin and so on. So we'll see, you know. Again, but the book isn't about that. So, I mean, it's that was the occasion. I mean, Putin having given his regional governors this reading list with these philosophers on it, and also many of the gestures he's made at, you know, going to monasteries and opening of cathedrals and things of that sort. That was the kind of occasion for, oh, what's happening here? Because it's another version of this kind of occult or mystical politics where sort of spiritual ideas, metaphysical ideas are informing, or at least being part of you know, some kind of political agenda at the time. And I'm not saying he's particularly spiritual or particularly mystical. It's just, he's a politician and a strategist and tactician. So all these things are done for political reasons. I mean, I'm aware of that. But it's just interesting to see how ideas that we generally don't consider, you know, to really impinge on political, you know, happenings or actually come. Well, that's one of the things that's happened, I would say, in the last four years since the American, you know, the first presidential election with Trump, was that all this stuff that was on the margins and on the fringes has come center. So again, it's another example of reality going up for grabs, and I think that's the fundamental thing. You know, we're in this period where, you know, what we consider reality has come completely unhinged and overturned in a variety of different ways. I mean, in very concrete ways recently, because of the, you know, the COVID-19, you know, crisis, where, you know, the normal is gone. I did want to ask, though, any word on the new abnormal? Because we hear lots and lots about the new normal, and I haven't heard about the new abnormal. But I guess the old normal is the new abnormal. So
yeah, exactly. It's the new abnormal. Yeah, and I find it, yeah, how easily people are going along with it. That's frightening to me.
Well, I don't know. What can you say? We're all in the same boat, and I guess it's up to us to make the best decisions we can for ourselves. I mean,
Yeah.
I stop at red lights, so everybody else stops at red lights. So the government is telling me to stop at a red light, and it seems like a good idea. So not everything, and again, I'm not trying to condone or in favor of, and just saying not everything, because the government says something, just because the government says it doesn't mean that it's, oh, I can't do it because the government's telling me to do it. Just because the government says it doesn't mean you have to do it either. But it's just sort of like, somebody. The last thing I would want to be would be a politician. The last thing I'd want to be somebody who has to make these decisions, because I certainly wouldn't want to. I wouldn't want to. I wouldn't want to be in their shoes. And the politics is the world of the possible. It's not the world of the ideal. It's about the word polis itself. It's about the city. It's about all different people living together, and how do you arrive at the not the best possible arrangement, but the least. the least uncomfortable, and the one that creates the least friction. And one of the sad lessons of history is efforts to try and create an ideal world usually generate the opposite.
Yeah.
There's nothing but the best intentions behind the French Revolution and the Bolsheviks, but look what happened.
Yeah, all those revolutions, they backfire.
Well, the first thing they do is eat their own, and they get rid of all the other revolutionaries first. So I mean, but that's, again, this is, we talked about solar influences. Gurdjieff would be saying, well, this is what's happening. The planets are getting too close together to each other. They're creating this kind of tension, and the moon's very hungry, so all this stuff. So the best thing you could do is listen to the advice: stay at home. Just stay at home. Avoid crowds of people. Avoid all that kind of stuff. This is not a good time to be around crowds of people for hygienic health reasons, to spread an actual, virus, and then also psychically, because there's psychic viruses that spread very quickly too. And the pressure, seeing other people around you act in a certain way, that can, against your own best intentions, that can influence you too. One of the things Gebser talks about, he talks about the magical structure of consciousness, which goes very, very far back in time in human history. But it's still, these structures are still part of us. They don't disappear. They stay, but other structures grow on top of them, as it were. But we can still feel the effects of this magical structure. And you said it's a visceral kind of thing, where you actually, your body has its own kind of consciousness and energy, and it's affected by the other sort of bodies around it. So even if you said, well, no, yes, I want to go to this demonstration, but I'm not going to, I'm going to make sure I just do the right thing, and I'm not going to be whatever. You could still somehow get infected by other stuff happening around there. And I'm not saying that there isn't a good reason for the demonstrations. I'm just saying this is something that happens in these kind of contexts. And especially, it's a very volatile time now. So, there's a lot of fuses out there, and there's a lot of matches.
Yeah, and a lot of nonsense.
They're getting closer and closer together. So,
yeah, and a lot of nonsensical things.
True.
Like this mask wearing, it doesn't do anything for anybody.
Well, I don't know. I'm not an expert in this area. We're kind of like just chatting about things in general. I mean, to tell you the truth, I didn't think it was gonna go this way. I find myself, I'm thinking, oh, this is going to be. I don't necessarily want to be sort of publicly saying this or that or that kind of thing,
okay.
So
yeah, but because since here I cannot go to a supermarket without that thing, I had a certain interest in what is that actually doing. So I
have no idea, because here the message has been, well, I don't know. Initially, they said they're not that effective, and we don't want people buying lots of them, and so the people who need them won't have them, because lots of people have bought them. Then they said, okay, yes, I guess the science at that point said, okay. And now, at least here in London, if you use public transportation, you need to wear a mask. And some shops say, no mask, no entry. Others, it's not. So it's kind of up in the air. Personally, myself, I'm been self-isolated since the thing started. I'm not in any crowded public spaces. I haven't used public transport in months. I get around on my bicycle. I go to small local shops here where there's usually 1 or 2 people in them. I mean, you know, if I have to use public transport, I'll wear the mask. And if it turns out to say you have to, if you want to go in a shop, you have to wear them, I'll do it just because they say to do it. So I suspect, you know, it's probably say, well, if we don't do this and lots of people get sick, then they'll complain to say that we didn't tell them to do it, you know. So I don't know, you know. I would imagine a lot of decisions are both about trying to keep people safe and also to, you know, make sure that the government isn't seen to be lax and irresponsible. So in any case.
So what is your feeling? Where are we headed for the rest of the year?
I don't know. More of the same. I'm not headed anywhere. I'm staying here. So not like lots of other people who, you know, some people are going to, you know, take advantage of now you can travel a bit. So I don't know. I personally have no idea. I mean, I guess in a way I'm just sitting it out. You know, I live fairly. My life hasn't changed that much because of it. You know, I spend a lot of time reading, writing, you know, that kind of thing. I'm not the most gregarious person. And you know, I can't go to cafes to have a coffee in the afternoon now, so that's a sacrifice, but it's nothing compared to what lots of other people had to go through. So I don't know, you know, things just many things are happening. We seem to be at a time where lots of things are getting upended and changed. So just stay alert. I keep repeating things that sound like the government messages, but I just mean in general, you know, that's always a good advice. You know, stay awake, stay alert. You know, as I said earlier, I think the best way someone like myself can contribute to any you know, beneficial outcome of this is to just carry on doing the work I'm doing.
Yeah, Gary, I thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. My pleasure. I have to say, I didn't expect it to be quite this kind of open-ended conversation. So it was, yeah. We'll see what happens. We'll see what it looks like. Okay. Well, thank you. All right. Take care.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye.